ready to go. It's 10:30 on October 1st, 2015, and I'm pleased to call to order the 165th meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. Chairman Crosby is not in attendance here. He's off for a trip for a few days, and so the four of us will proceed in his absence. I'll call the first order of business, which is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of September 17. They are in the book, and I would move, as is customary, that they be adopted in form that's there with the usual reservation of rights to correct mechanical and typographical errors.
Second.
Any discussion? Any issues, questions? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes with that reservation and in that form, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it unanimously. And that'll bring us to the second item, the third item really, on the agenda. Director Wells.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Commissioners.
Good morning.
So under general update, just make the public aware, we did receive an RFA 2 application from Mass Gaming and Entertainment. There'll be further discussion with the Ombudsman, John Ziemba, later in the meeting, but I just wanted to alert that to the public. And also, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Stebbins regarding an update on the executive director search. I would like just to publicly comment that the transition period where I've been acting as interim director has been successful. We've been moving along very well, really, and thanks to the senior staff that we have that has been such a great assistance to me. So I just want to publicly thank them for all they're doing to support me in that position. Doing a great job. We're moving along. We're all looking forward to the process and getting a new executive director on board. So thank you.
And Director, we want to thank you for your leadership during this period, your collaboration, and the way in which you notify all of us when there's an issue or just anything going on with the commission. So we want to thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo that. I think this has proceeded very smoothly under what could have been a much more bumpy transition, but it's proceeded very smoothly, and it's due to you and the fine and able directors with whom you're working. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So
Okay.
Over to Commissioner Stebbins for an update.
We will
on the
get to
search.
Commissioner
Sure.
Stebbins.
I would echo my colleagues, Karen, in terms of the job you've done serving as interim. I can just not finish the rest of my report if you just want to just step forward. No, just a general update. Not much new to report since we met last Thursday, but our total number of resumes received is now up over 40. We have a number of candidates who we are beginning to look at to begin the first round of the interview process, hopefully starting within the next week and a half. Again, there's no deadline for the application. It is on a rolling basis until the candidate is selected. We fed information out about the posting to not only our staff who were attending G2E this week in Las Vegas, but also to other stakeholders, counterparts, folks at the AGA as well, to make them aware of the updated term in case they ran into someone in their networking circles at G2E who might be interested in the position. So hopefully we'll see a bump in that number as G2E comes to a close this week. But that's my report so far.
G2E being the
Big
large
gaming
national and international conference that's held annually. That's the sort of the premier gathering of people in the gaming industry.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great.
The next item on the agenda under administration is a follow-up discussion on the fines and penalties and notice of noncompliance. And I have my Deputy Director and the Chief Enforcement Counsel, Loretta Lilios, to address the Commission on that.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
In your packet, you have a flow chart which depicts the process for civil administrative penalties. And this flow chart reflects some modifications. This flow chart reflects some modifications of the chart that was discussed at the September 17th meeting. And again, to orient you to what this is a flow chart of the process for implementing Chapter 23K, Section 36, on assessing civil administrative penalties for failure to comply with Chapter 23K or 205
Administration is a
CMR.
follow-up discussion on the fines
As
and
the chart
penalties and
depicts,
notice
the
of
first
noncompliance, and I
step
have
is
my
then
Deputy
an act of
Director and the Chief
noncompliance
Enforcement
comes to the
Counsel,
attention
Loretta
of the
Lilios,
gaming
to address the
agent,
Commission on
either
that.
through his or her own observation or
All
through
right,
a
good morning.
report.
Good morning.
The gaming agent documents the noncompliance, and then step 3A is the primary goal is to bring the casino into compliance. So with that in mind, the supervising
This flow
gaming
chart
agent
reflects some
discusses the
modifications
matter
of the chart
with
that was
casino
discussed
department
at the
head
September
and the
17th
compliance
meeting.
officer
And
at the
again, to
casino
orient
in
you
order
to what this,
correct the matter. Proceeding there, we go to step 4. So if the same noncompliance recurs, that is documented, and it is brought to the attention of Bruce Band, our gaming agent division chief, who reviews the reports and the history with myself. From that point, a recommendation is then made to Karen Wells in her role as IEB director, and a recommendation can take one of 4 forms, which are drawn directly from the statute and appear in step 5. Based on our discussion 2 weeks ago, there is a 3B added to this chart that we referred to last time as sort of an escape hatch for egregious situations that may require immediate action. And then steps 3A and 4 would be skipped over and bypassed so that the gaming agent report would go directly to Bruce Band. And I think the example that was given 2 weeks ago was a situation that thankfully has not occurred, but an employee stealing from the casino, and the casino has not been following procedures that would have allowed that, would have been designed for that not to happen. Step 6 is the IEB director reviews the recommendation and the supporting documentation and makes a determination to approve or not approve the action. And the casino then may seek review of the action from a hearing officer, and either party may then seek review to the full commission. I did want to report that we have implemented this process already on 2 occasions. We have issued 2 notices of noncompliance to the Plainridge Park Casino. The first was issued on September 2nd, and it was a notice of noncompliance for not maintaining the minimum security staffing departments or positions, not maintaining the minimum staffing levels in the security department. In that situation, our gaming agents systematically monitored the security department staffing levels over a 2-week period, and as a result issued a report to Mr. Band, which was reviewed with myself, then went to the director, and the notice then issued. In accordance with the statute, the time given for coming into compliance was a 2-week period of time to come into compliance. I want to report that the property took this extremely seriously and immediately implemented steps, including making some adjustments to their related protocols, additional hiring and adjustments to staffing and scheduling were immediately put into place. We issued a second notice of noncompliance on September 23rd, and that one was for noncompliance related to the regulation and the internal control regarding the prevention of gambling and entry to the gaming establishment by underage persons. And that notice related to a particular incident that occurred back in July when 2 underage individuals entered the casino, made their way onto the gaming floor where they remained for 24 minutes and engaged in some gaming at various slot locations during that 24-minute period before being stopped by security and who requested identification, and it was at that point that it was determined that they were underage. In that notice, we directed the casino to take substantial and material steps to come into full compliance within a one-week period, and that they were to report on their steps to us in advance. And those steps have been reported. They largely take the form of training, and again, the property was responsive to this situation. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them.
So in the incident, the second incident that you reported, it was the security folks at the establishment who, albeit belatedly, found the underage people and attended to that. Is that right?
Ultimately, it was.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
And subsequent to that, they self-reported the violation to our gaming agents?
They, upon discovery by security that they had underage persons on the floor, they immediately notified our State Police Gaming Enforcement Unit, which is part of the protocol for them to do, and they did do that immediately.
Just referring to the process sheet, and I appreciate the addition of 3B. Is it safe to assume, and I can't recall whether this is in regulations or not, that there's some agreement between us and Plain Ridge Park on what would qualify as an egregious situation?
Well, I don't think we have any list, formal list of what would be egregious, but I think it's safe to say that based on the ongoing communication on a daily basis with our on-site gaming agent staff, including the supervising staff, that an egregious matter would not come as a surprise. So there's not really a list of those at this point. I expect that they would parallel industry standards of what would be egregious, and that we would recognize them when we see them. And the example given last week of the stealing employee in the casino not following protocol that ultimately allowed that to happen is one example. But there is daily communication.
Okay. And again, I'm not suggesting that a list of every possibility under the sun is necessary, but as long as the relationship between our team down there and their team is that there's a mutual understanding of what would qualify as something that would fall under the 3B step in the process.
And I think it's important to reiterate that the goal, and I think it's clear with the facility that the mutual goal is to bring the property into compliance. So the addition of this 3B, which came as a result of the discussion from the commissioners, was really just to document that in unanticipated, egregious cases, there was an opportunity to bypass step 4.
Okay. Thank you.
And ultimately, if there were disagreement by the facility on that, that's something that can be appealed to the hearing officer.
That's
Right.
correct.
So it likely will come as no surprise based
That's
on
correct.
industry practice. But if it does come as a surprise, then we ultimately would have an opportunity to take a look, albeit after the fact, at whether we agreed that that was egregious or not. So there's a mechanism to work that out, I see.
And, I can attest to just around the opening, the constant communication, and I was really impressed with our staff, our experienced staff, supervision, and how well they worked, to remind the Penn staff, many of whom were new people, and really work with them about this is what we'll be looking for, be cautious about this. So there was very, an awful lot of dialogue, and in a way, that the new Penn staff would understand and use it as a form of training. And so I know that that's constant, and I was pleased with our staff in the way in which they handled situations, and it was in an effort to teach, it was in an effort to remind, and clear communication as to what we would be looking for and what we considered to be egregious, what we considered to be minor. So I know that conversation, all those conversations have occurred.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had one question about, and I was not here for the first one, so this may have been asked and answered already. Number 8, that's at a request, correct? That would occur upon a request.
Correct.
Okay.
A notice of, or a request for an appeal review.
Yes.
So you're not looking for a vote today on this, right?
No, I really wanted to bring the modifications to the flow chart to your attention and also report on the 2 notices that were issued.
All right. It strikes me that this is an ongoing process that we are beginning, really. We talked about basically a common law approach rather than a set of regulations to the fines and penalties aspect of our business. And this is a component of that. But it also strikes me that as we move forward, we may want to change this. Some things may prove not to be as useful or there may be other issues that arise with respect to implementation of this. And so it seems to me that we ought to be prepared to have you modify them based on your experience without necessarily having to come back before the commission to seek a modification, but notifying the commission of those modifications after the fact. I don't know whether my colleagues have any thoughts about that, but I think we have to recognize that it is a dynamic process. I don't want to cast this in stone. The important thing is that the licensees have an understanding of what the operative framework is before some action is taken, and so if that is done, I'm perfectly content to have you change it and then come back and tell us that you've done so.
Great. I think that's...
I agree with that. This is a framework. It's a good framework, but it cannot be thought of as a recipe that has to be always followed, or if a case occurs that we need to tweak,
Right.
They should do it on the spot, because the ability to do it there is imperative.
I absolutely agree with that.
Okay, great, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Director Wells, anything further?
Pardon me. And we also have Christopher Bruce, the crime analyst, for the next agenda item.
All right, Mr. Bruce and Director Vanderlinden. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning. Do you want to start, Director Vanderlinden, and then we'll meet Mr. Bruce and have him
Yeah.
proceed as well?
I am joined by Christopher Bruce. Christopher is a career crime analyst. We're very fortunate to have him on this project, which is to take a look at what are the crime impacts related to gaming. This is part of the broader study of the social and economic impacts of gaming in Massachusetts, or the SIGMA study. Chapter 23K, Section 71, directs the Gaming Commission to develop a research agenda in order to understand the social and economic impacts of expanded gaming in Massachusetts. There's a section within Chapter 71 that directs us to assess the relationship between crime and the expansion of gaming in the Commonwealth. Taking a look at crime, accurately measuring crime and connecting it to the expansion of gaming can be an incredibly difficult undertaking. We've taken a look at a number of studies that have been done, not just in the United States, but in other jurisdictions. And quite honestly, there isn't a lot to draw upon in terms of a model. One of the major weaknesses of existing studies is that it lacks a baseline, that being an understanding what is the existing level of crime before a casino moves into or opens up in a jurisdiction. Another weakness that we found in the existing body of evidence is that it lacks a connection to really explore what is the true connection between the crime and how does it connect with the opening of a casino or a gaming establishment. I'm very pleased to work with Commissioner Cameron, Christopher Bruce, our local police departments in Plainville and the surrounding communities to address those specific issues, to have a baseline, to try to take every effort that we can to connect it to take a look at crime and see if it connects to the expansion of gaming or the opening of Plain Ridge Casino, and do this in the right way. So with that, I will turn it over to Christopher, who is going to present to you our baseline findings that analyzes crime, call for service, and collision data in the Plainville region from the term of 2010 to 2014. Thanks.
Great. As we prepare for that transition and look forward to hearing your report, let me just take a second to put this into the broader context, because this is part of, as you said, the overall study that we're doing, a first-in-the-nation study of all kinds of impacts, of potential impacts of gambling on society and the arena within which it plays. And we've had reports before with respect to, extended reports before with respect to the problem gambling aspect of it, which we're aggressively studying and trying to remedy. And we said that we were also preparing to measure many other changes, or the absence of other changes, to get away from stories and intuition about the nexus between gambling and various social effects. This is a piece of that, and really the first piece that's gotten this far. But there are others that are in progress, and no doubt we'll hear about them more later. So that's
correct.
to put the broader context, if I'm correct, in that assessment.
Yes, that's right. In fact, in a couple meetings later this month, I'll be back before the commission to talk about and present baseline findings for the host communities, host and surrounding communities, and get an update from our economic impact team.
Great. This is very exciting stuff. So, Mr. Bruce, without further
Very good. Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice isn't as smooth and resonant as I normally would like. But as Mark indicated, the previous studies that have been done on the impacts of casinos in communities have largely focused on broad crime statistics, generally the FBI's Part 1 crimes, the most serious 7 crimes that typically get reported to the FBI. And they typically only study that one variable, the crime itself, the volume of crime. And I can understand why, because it's really kind of a nightmare to collect more in-depth data from the typical police records management system. But that's what we've done in this case. We've gone into each of the record systems from the contributing communities and pulled out data not just about the crime, but about dates and times and locations and people involved and the properties involved and location types and so forth, to really allow us to analyze a large variety of potential changes that take place when the casino is open. So that's sort of what distinguishes our particular project. Not only are we looking at crime changes, of course, we're also looking at calls for service that are not related to crime, but still have an impact on police activity that the police have to respond to, traffic collisions, disputes, disabled motor vehicles, things like that cause the police to increase their time perhaps, but don't rise to the level of crime. And we're looking also not only in whether things increase or decrease, but do things change while volume remains the same? Do hotspots change? Does the profile of the typical victim or the offender change in response to the casino? When we do identify changes, we want to go in depth into analyzing those specific patterns and problems, right? So it's not enough just to say that there was an X% increase in, say, thefts from vehicles in the surrounding communities. I want to know specifically where those occurred, what time of day, what was being stolen, who's breaking into the cars, who were the victims, everything that we need to know in order to help the police agencies better respond to those changes in public safety issues in their communities. So on the screen here, obviously there's a map of the area that we're in question, and 5 of the communities that were designated as surrounding communities have contributed data so far. Foxborough's the exception, and we're still continuing to work with them. So the baseline report that you have is based on Wrentham, Plainville, North Attleboro, and Mansfield data. I've just recently received some data from the state police, so that will be included in future analyses that we do as part of this project. And the project, the major things we've accomplished so far is to extract the data from each individual agency's CAD and records management systems. CAD stands for computer-aided dispatch. So there's 2 systems, one where the original call for service goes and the other where the crime report goes after the police officer finishes filling it out. And we've extracted data from both of those systems. There's 3 different vendors that serving the 6 communities in the Plainville region. So we had to work to combine the data from the 3 different systems and create common code libraries and so forth. Based on that data set, we've established a baseline volume of crime, calls for service, and traffic collisions within the surrounding communities. We've talked to the agencies, I'll talk more about this later, about tracking specific incidents that they believe are casino-related. And we're now in the phase of starting to analyze the changes that have taken place since Plain Ridge Park opened on June 24th. As of yesterday, we have a full quarter's worth of data, basically, July, August, and September, since the casino opened. So I'll be updating the data this week and preparing the first change analysis for the meeting later this month. And of course, we're working with the larger Sigma project to incorporate the data sets that we have with the broader public safety issues, broader social and economic issues that center is studying as well. So I'll skip ahead here. So these are some slides from the baseline report that you all have. I didn't include everything in the PowerPoint presentation, and I didn't include everything from the data set in the report itself. I mean, I could have sliced statistics 100 different ways and created a report that was thousands of pages long, but instead I just tried to offer the statistics that I thought were going to be the most valuable for analyzing change going forward. But that doesn't preclude the potential other statistics from coming out of the project, depending on what we determine has changed in the data set. So the more important thing is that we have a baseline data set rather than the baseline report specifically, if that makes sense. So as you can see on the screen, these are numbers of crimes for Plainville specifically, not the other communities, but just the town of Plainville over the last 5 years. And these are annual totals, so as you can imagine, quarterly totals are going to be significantly smaller, about a quarter of what we're seeing on the screen. What is notable, what I like to see here is that Plainville's crime volume is fairly small. So it's going to, any major changes that develop because of the presence of the casino are going to be quite notable. It's going to be more difficult, say, in Springfield to analyze changes that are caused by the casino there because they have fairly high numbers so far. So it might be possible for any changes to get lost in the overall volume. But Plainville's sort of a different story in that regard. So you can see a selection of crimes there. And that last column there, the coefficient of variation, or the CV, tells us how much that crime typically fluctuates from year to year, basically, on a scale of 0 to 1. And while some of them are quite high, enough are low enough, and the overall volume is low that, again, it's going to be fairly easy to be able to pick out changes. For instance, look at at forgery. Now that includes check forgery and counterfeiting and so forth. With a volume of only 5 to 9 per year over the last 5 years, if they only got 3 or 4 more because of the presence of the casino, that would really stand out from that fairly low volume. So that makes it fairly easy to analyze changes in Plainville specifically. If we look at the overall,
before you leave
Yeah,
the
sure.
slide, could you explain again what the last column is, the CV column?
a CV, so the coefficient, so if you look at the average, the average is the arithmetic mean for the
Right.
previous 5 years,
Right.
right? And the standard deviation
Right.
tells us how much, on average,
Right.
that crime deviates from year to
Right.
year. So
Right.
the coefficient of variation is simply the standard deviation divided by the average.
I got it.
So where the standard deviation, the lowest it could ever be is 0, the lowest the coefficient of variation could be is 0. And that would be there was no deviation, whatsoever from year to year, and the highest would be slightly higher than 1. So what the CV gives us is a sense of how volatile is that crime? How much does it fluctuate typically from year to year? When the higher the number, say for sexual assault, for instance,
Right.
the higher the figure, the more difficult it is to detect the effects of changes based on something like a casino or a Walmart or whatever else happens in the community, because if the crime is always up and down like crazy anyway, it's going to be tough to identify changes. The lower the volume, the more predictable the crime is, and therefore the easier it is to identify changes. Does that make sense?
Yes. So in this, just to see if it does make, if I understand the sense it makes, the the credit card fraud is a pretty stable
Yes.
feature of the
Exactly.
Plainville landscape.
Yeah. Credit card fraud is highly predictable from year to year,
Right. And sexual assault is not.
whereas
probably
sexual
thrown
assault
off.
isn't because of that one
That-
errant year in 2014.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thefts from vehicles are another good example. Now, that's a crime I definitely want to study, because that's one of the ones based on some prior research that we expect might increase because of the presence of a casino. And if you look at the numbers over the years, they had that big spike in 2011. Now, I don't know for sure, but I suspect some serial offender came to town in 2011 and caused that, they might have hit 20 or 30 cars on a single weekend or something, and
Right.
caused that huge spike. So that because that happens occasionally, that makes it more difficult to analyze changes.
Right.
And we can't just depend upon raw volume, basically, in order
Right.
to see the effects of
Right.
the casino
Right.
in that particular case. Fortunately, we're not only depending on raw volume. So
Right.
So when we come back and look at future years,
yes,
if say the individual observations for year after year are within the standard deviation at the time, there would be no discernible attribution to the casino.
yes.
Is that generally the case? Because if you're within the standard deviation, it could be all due to chance.
Yes. If the 2015 figure turns out to be within a standard deviation of the norm, then that would suggest that the casino did not have a significant impact on that crime,
right.
at least in terms of overall volume. Again, keep in mind we're going to be looking at other types of changes as well, but
Right.
but that's the first place we'll look.
First.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you could also track the standard deviation, how it evolves over time.
Yes,
And that could also
that could change
give
as well.
you
Yeah.
an indication.
It isn't necessarily
That's always difficult because if you're aware of the possibility of an increase and you're alert for it and you respond accordingly, you're probably going to cause an increase. Changes in offender demographics, for instance, match the population of individuals who are using the casino's resources. And that might be more notable, for instance, in terms of how far they're traveling. So what we did was I mapped all the locations where people were coming from to commit crime or to be involved in crime, whether victims or offenders, and then where the crime happened, and calculated the distance that they had traveled to be a victim or be an offender. If that changes, then that might be notable. You know, if people are coming from far out of town to use the casino, and we see an increase in the distance traveled for offenders and victims, then that would suggest a casino influence, perhaps, even if the overall volume that doesn't change. And so here you can see the mean distance traveled for offenders for a variety of different crimes. As we typically see, the fraud and forgery type offenses have longer distances traveled than some of the other property crimes and violent crimes. Yes.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because they tend to be committed by more organized individuals and more organized groups that's set out from home with a plan. They might drive up the entire eastern seaboard committing a variety of fraud offenses at different communities, whereas something like an assault or a robbery tends to be a little less, well, a street robbery anyway, tends to be a little less planned and might be committed by somebody just wandering out of their house.
Credit card raid.
Yeah, credit card. You're right. You have more organization in that type of
Yes.
crime. Yeah.
This chart is a good reminder of how many crimes are committed by young people, right, in the 20s and 30s.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Makes the point when you see it in.
And obviously, we wouldn't expect that to be, if anything, the casino influence would create an older crowd, I suppose, for many of those crimes than a younger one.
On that note, how do you account for changes to the community? Besides the
Demographic changes to the community? Yeah.
Ages, growth, population growth.
That is a little bit more difficult because obviously the census is only taken on an annual basis, and we're trying to analyze changes that are occurring much more quickly than that. That isn't something we've researched very well so far. I'm not really sure to the extent to which the individual communities in the area do their own census. A lot of cities and towns do, and that's something we definitely do need to include. Obviously, if we do see changes in the ages of offenders and victims, but it also turns out that there's demographic changes in the communities, and that explains that more so than say the presence of a casino. It would be rare, though, to see a a rapid change in demographics in a community like the ones that we're studying here. It's something they'd have to build a university or something like that to see a real big change that quickly in demographics. So probably I would say the latest census is a good estimate of the underlying demographics. We're also looking at location type. This is particularly important because we might expect crime to increase at certain locations in the area, such as hotels and restaurants. One of the key theses here is that if activity does increase, it's primarily going to be caused, I think, by simply the extra traffic to the community. It's not so much the gambling aspect itself, but the fact that we have thousands of cars and thousands of visitors that we didn't have before. And it would be the same if a movie theater or a Walmart or something else had been built at the same location. So it's good to anticipate the people who are visiting, what types of resources in the community will they be using, and can we detect changes at those locations? So it makes sense that we'd see an increase, for instance, at hotels and restaurants and bars and places that casino visitors are likely to use in the surrounding community. So I have a set of baseline statistics for location type specifically that are in the report.
Are these numbers drawn from a annual? Yeah, so it's a single year.
Yes.
And is it for all 5 communities?
Yes, on the location type one it is.
Right.
In the report itself, I break it down by individual communities,
Right.
I think, but just for the purpose of the slide, I just put that one chart. And everything I've done in the baseline report is on an annual basis, even though for the purpose of the change analysis, I'll be looking at quarter to quarter.
Right.
But that would have just, if I'd done that in the report, I just would have bulked it up.
Right,
So.
right.
So as I want to emphasize, we're also looking at calls for service that are not necessarily related to crimes, and so I've got a selection of them on the slide here for both Plainville and all contributing agencies. So we want things like suspicious activity, disputes, disorderly conduct, disabled vehicles. These are things that take police time but don't rise to a criminal level, but it's still important to see what types of changes. In fact, we're more likely probably to see changes in these types of calls for service than we are in crime, especially in the Plainville region, and I'll explain why in just a second. Any questions about calls for service?
These are really stable, aren't they?
Yeah, calls for service, even more than crime, especially in Plainville, are extremely predictable year to year. Very, very tiny CVs, yeah, absolutely. And then we have some collision, and I didn't have a full collision data set for the baseline report, so I wasn't able to include things like causal factors, but I will include those in the future reports when we're looking at changes. So this chart indicates the type of collision, which is admittedly less useful than knowing why the collision happened, and that's where things like drunk driving and speeding and running red lights and so forth is much more useful to analyze, and we will do that for the future reports. I just didn't have a full data set for this one. Of course, we're looking at time of day, and we're going to look at changes in patterns of temporal patterns as well as overall volume. Naturally, it would be an obvious hypothesis is that the changes in calls for service and crime will skew towards the times that the casino is open and the times that people are coming and going from the casino. Right now, they're very heavy. The peaks are definitely during the middle of the day, especially during the evening commute, and we expect that probably to skew a little bit later because of the presence of the casino. We're, of course, looking at different types of spatial patterns as well. I just have a couple of examples in the report and on the slide. This is, let's see, disorderly conduct crimes throughout the region. So as you can see, the dot indicates where the casino is. There's not much around there, but if that changes, that would be an obvious thing to study. What I did was I broke up the area into smaller geographies based on travel routes with the hypothesis that if there is changes in crime and calls for service in the communities, they're most likely to take place along the major routes heading towards to and from the casino. And in addition, major routes that typically have things like hotels and restaurants and bars. So rather than look at the entire city, we'll look at the individual geographies that you can see on the screen. Although they look a little bit erratic, they're again based around those travel routes. and that'll allow us to identify hotspot changes specifically in those specific geographies. When we get started with the project, we had this idea that each of the individual cities could record incidents that they believed were casino related, whether that was because the offender was in the area to use the casino, or the victim was, or it occurred on casino property, or there was some other type of relationship. And you can see the codes on the screen that we had in mind for doing that recording. While I still think it's a good idea, it ended up being a little bit daunting for the agencies to implement this kind of coding scheme with their existing resources and their existing system. So what most of them are doing are just adopting a sort of a yes/no flag. This is or this is not casino related, without recording, at least with external to the narrative of the report, exactly why it's casino related. While it's not as good as what we originally envisioned, it does give us something. I'm committed to working with the records management vendors going forward to make sure that they can implement a more robust coding system for both the Plainville area, but also for obviously in the Everett area, the Springfield area, wherever else casinos are being built. So unfortunately, we didn't get as far as we wanted to with this particular part yet, but it's something that we're still going to pursue. Now, it's important to keep in mind that because we typically don't know who the offender is in most crimes, if you were to rely on just those incidents that the agencies coded as being casino related, you'd vastly undercount the incidents that actually were casino related. So the idea here isn't to give us a number, but it's to give us an idea of, it's to help us analyze the volume changes. So for instance, if burglary increased in the community, we can look at those that were specifically designated as casino related to see what the characteristics of those incidents were to help explain the increase in burglary, right? So the idea for these codes is not to give us a count of how many incidents are casino related. It's to identify those incidents that are worthy of further analysis to help explain increases. Does that make sense?
This is a good example of good not being the enemy of
Yes.
perfect. I mean, we will get better. We will, as these agencies morph into new records management systems, there's the opportunity at the front end to implement casino-related crimes as a way to capture and possibly the systems that are in place, there's work with them. But as of now, we don't have the ability to capture this in an ideal fashion, but all the chiefs are very helpful and enthusiastic about trying as best they can to help us have accurate data.
Yes, and the lessons we learned from this, we can carry
Yes.
forward into further, into other areas. So the next phases of the project are to, as I just said, work with the RMS vendors to find better ways to record those incidents that are casino related. We're integrating data from the state police and hopefully from Foxborough fairly soon into the analyses. And of course, it's most important to analyze what changes in the communities directly surrounding the casino, but it's possible we might see crime changes in communities further away that are still worthy of analysis. Now, we can't collect the depth of data that we're getting from these surrounding communities from every place in Massachusetts. It would just be too hard, too time consuming. But at least we can study their the crime changes that they're reporting as a matter of course to the state police as part of the IVR process, the incident-based reporting process, which we're very fortunate. Massachusetts is one of the leaders in the country in terms of the number of agencies that are reporting to this reporting system. It doesn't give us the same detail that we get from that we're getting from the local agencies in the Plainville area by collecting the data directly from their systems, but it's a much greater level of detail than the typical state has as to the number and types of crimes that are occurring in the various communities. So hopefully, ultimately, we're going to incorporate the statewide IVR data into this analysis process to see what happens in communities that aren't necessarily directly surrounding the casino. It's going to be tougher to establish causation in those facts, but it's still worth looking at that data. And then finally, starting today, we can do a full quarter analysis of what happens, what has happened in the Plainville region, so by collecting a new set of data and comparing it to what happened in the baseline statistics.
Is that the intention, to look at it quarterly?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I originally thought it'd be nice to do it on a monthly basis, more frequently. But having collected, I collected some data from a couple of the communities, Plainville specifically, 2 months ago, and not enough had changed. The numbers were too small. There just wasn't enough data there to really establish anything useful for such a small time period. So quarterly seems like the best way to go at this point.
And that's still real-time.
Yeah.
Information for the chiefs to utilize. Possibly with the bigger cities, it would be of value to have monthly reporting.
Well, the good news is with the larger cities, they have each of the agencies in the Everett area and the Springfield area have their own crime analysts working for the police department. So I envision working with them to help their analysis, but they can largely do some of their own analysis on a month-to-month basis and inform their own departments. Plainville's a little bit odd in that respect. Actually, Mansfield just got a crime analyst, but before Mansfield, only Attleboro had one. So they needed something like our project in order to help them analyze the changes. That's going to be less. There's going to be less of that need in the other communities.
Before bringing this information in a public forum, we did meet with the chiefs to let them know, let them see the data. In fact, some of them were surprised at a few things. They don't have the analytical ability. And Christopher, to your credit, we offered, look, if there's something here you want me to drill down, I'd be happy to do that. So Christopher offered that to the chiefs involved in this project. So again, it is not just you give us everything you have, we really do want to be of value to those communities as well. And this project is working on that.
And to sort of, sorry, question. To sort of conclude, I just wanted to sort of introduce this theoretical framework for analyzing the changes going forward. So there's a number of mechanisms by which crime and calls for service might change in the areas after a casino is open. And I think that the first one, this is just my hypothesis at this point, obviously I'm not married to it, and if it turns out to be wrong, I'll be happy to analyze the data no matter what it shows. But I think probably what's likely to happen is we're going to see a lot of changes that are simply caused by the increased traffic in the area. And so that's likely to manifest specifically traffic-related incidents and general service calls for service. Anytime you gather thousands of people in a place, you're going to get disputes, lost property, traffic complaints, parking complaints, traffic accidents, just all those things that happen when people come together and interact. But there are some other theories out there as well. So for instance, we might see, because all those people are going to be in this area, we might see offenders who have nothing to do with the casino. They're just regular offenders who normally have been committing burglaries and thefts from vehicles anyway, taking advantage of the fact that all these new cars and people are in the area. So that's another possibility, and that would manifest itself in things like thefts from vehicles and robberies. We're not going to see robberies probably in the Plainville area because they don't have very many anyway, but more in the Springfield area or the Everett area. That would be a possible increase to look for. Then there's the possibility of offenders committing crimes specifically to get funds to use at the casino. I think that's sort of the public perception of what's likely to happen, and that would manifest itself in increases in fraud and forgery and bad checks and maybe things like burglaries in the area. I think that's less likely than the other possibilities, but obviously, again, it's something we're going to look for. The other thing that I think is largely in the public perception is the idea of the casino as an attractor for other types of illicit activities like prostitution and drugs and so forth. And that would manifest itself in those crimes, likely at things like hotels and restaurants and other service establishments in the area. Again, I don't think it's as likely as the overall traffic increase, but we'll be looking for it. And then, of course, there's the casino's location-specific activity. So the fact that the casino's there, they're serving alcohol, that might lead to drunk driving increases, as we talked about, and other liquor-related crimes and so forth. That stuff can be anticipated ahead of time and controlled better than the other types of crimes based on casino policy and the types of enforcement that we're doing. And it seems like from the meetings that we've had that Plainridge Park and the state police and your own plans have done a good job anticipating that type of thing. So I think it's probably less likely than, again, the overall traffic-based increase. But that's sort of the framework that for the way things could have increased, the way things could change because of the presence of a casino. And so we'll try to, as best as possible, based on the data that we have, tie any increases that we see back to one of those potential causes, if that makes sense.
But at the same time, be open to the fact that these are not the changes that are going to.
Oh, yes, yeah. This is based
You're
on
gonna have
an analysis of what's happened in other communities that have had casinos, but it's entirely possible that none of them might be at work in Plainville or in any of the other communities where casinos open. And yes, we're definitely starting from a blank slate on that, but no assumptions are going into the analysis. But if they do change, that gives us a theoretical framework to explain why they might change, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, because I raised that because we've already said that the other studies that are out there are largely unsatisfactory, and therefore this is an opportunity to either confirm in a scientifically reliable manner or debunk these theories that are out there.
Yes.
Right. This really looks thoughtful. There's a detailed and very exciting. There is, not on the board now, but in the materials, a much longer narrative. I don't know whether you're going to deal with that or not.
I have the full report here if you want to look at any particular part of it. I didn't think it would be a good use of time to go through the entire thing, but
No, I share that, but I just wanted those who are watching and listening to understand that there's more here. You've obviously been doing this for some period of time. Could you just give us a little bit of your background and how you came to this?
sure. I've been a crime analyst for about 22 years now. I started with the Cambridge Police Department of Massachusetts in 1994. I was there for 7 years, and I went to the Danvers Police Department for 9 years. I was president of the International Association of Crime Analysts for 6 years during that period. And for the last few years, I've been doing a lot of different consulting and technical assistance and training. So for a couple of decades, I've been very active in the crime analysis community. I've taught a lot of classes. I've worked with analysts around the country, big cities, small cities, out of the country even to, and my specialty is really delving into the record systems of police agencies, pulling the data out and making something useful with it. So this was a very interesting project to work on.
We're glad to have you with us. I had two substantive questions, three actually. I take it that because you're going into systems to look at historical information to establish the baseline, that information is there, and the historical baseline can almost always be created
Yes.
by an analysis.
Yeah, once you have the data, calculating the statistics is fairly easy.
So we don't have to establish the baseline today, or it's never going to be
No.
able to do it.
No, absolutely not.
Has this approach that you're taking, the geographical piece, how is this going to be reviewed, peer reviewed or otherwise?
Well, that's an excellent question. I don't know that we have a particular plan for that. Maybe Mark can speak to that a little bit better.
Yeah, no, we don't have a specific plan for a peer review process. And I think certainly
Well, the reason I ask that question is that it seems to me part of the value of this is its standardization if it's widespread, right? You have, as I understand it, crime analysts in many police departments, but they may go about what they do in a slightly different fashion and be looking for slightly different things. And to get what we're trying to get at, which is the nexus between criminal behavior and a casino influence, it really would be helpful, would it not, to have a standardized template that we use in each location, or is that not so?
No, I think there's something to that, and certainly I appreciate your comment that I think this project will help the overall crime analysis community. What we're studying here isn't unique to Massachusetts. In fact, I have a colleague in Schenectady, New York, who's very interested in what we're doing because he needs to replicate it in his own agency. I think that the problem with trying to standardize it is that every community is very different. I mean, even in Massachusetts, what we see happen in the Plainville region, where we have a fairly small community and the casino is right off the highway, and it's not in any way a dense urban area, is much different than what we're likely to see in Springfield or Everett, where the opposite is true in both cases. And so different factors have to go into the analysis based on the changing needs of the surrounding communities. But it certainly is something worth thinking about, because I agree that it would be very useful if we could establish some kind of standardized template that other places could use, and that, I mean, I don't know how long I'll be attached to the project, but that you all can use going forward for the next decades as gaming, the face of gaming changes in Massachusetts.
One of the things I was trying to get at here is we hear now a lot of discussion about the nexus between casinos and crime, right? And there are some who say there's a huge nexus that if we have a casino, XYZ is going to happen. We have people on the other side saying, no, nothing's going to happen, or it's going to be very good. No different from putting a hotel in the middle of a busy area, or a bank, or a restaurant. And policy derives from that, and positions derive from those views, and this is an effort to try to demythologize that stuff. But if the data itself is, or the approach itself is subject to the same kind of back and forth that the stories are subject to, then we lose the value of the data and the analysis, at least some of the value of the data and the analysis. In other words, if we have the template that for this reason that you've set up, and somebody says, no, you didn't look at XYZ, and if you had looked at XYZ, you would have come to very different conclusions. That doesn't advance the ball to the extent we want. I just put that out there.
I think the power that comes from this methodology, in my opinion, is looking at trends over time. The same methodology, we could talk a lot about variables. There's a lot being captured. There's a lot that could be captured because the historical data is there. Might never go away. But insights like the one you just mentioned, from alcohol-related collision as opposed to DUI that are more likely the result of increased police activity. To me, sound very good as a framework, and then we come look at it over time, which is the whole genesis of our stigma study. Anyway.
There is who's the expert in Las Vegas who's done some work in this area. I mean, so we did take steps, not to just take Christopher's work. We had him on a conference call about the work he's done, and Christopher saying, "Hey, do you have suggestions for me?" He was so impressed because the piece that's different here is the cooperation of the police departments. That is the piece that has not happened in the past. He said he could not get police departments in that area to work collaboratively in order to go into this kind of, the level of detail and the access to their records is a piece that makes this unique and much stronger, isn't it?
Dr. Mark Nichols from University of Nevada.
Yes. I was going to make that a similar point to the question of the peer review. I think there's enough, there's quite a bit of set of eyes looking at these in the chiefs, in ourselves, in the public, and with the help of just straight methodology analytics, we can have these discussions and have the exchange of why these X or Y Z measure might be a good one or better.
Well, I didn't have a particular academic kind of peer review in mind, and maybe the chiefs are the peers. I mean, maybe that's what I'm trying to suggest. The desirability of is sort of consumer buy-in to this, so that we don't wind up with a yeah, but you didn't look at kind of thing, and maybe the chiefs who look at this and know their towns and know their communities and say, yeah, this is great, and this helps us, and it's very useful to us. Maybe that's the kind of thing that's precisely what we need, and that's
I would also put out that in my fellow community of analysts, a peer group, and I would certainly love to be able to take the results of this work next year and present it at the Massachusetts Association of Crime Analysts and the International Association of Crime Analysts conferences, where I might get some valuable feedback. But certainly it would make sense for us to put together a list of people like Dr. Nichols and other, it was Nichols, right? Yeah. And other people working in the field who could review the reports. I would say wait for the first change report, but review those reports and suggest other possible avenues. I would absolutely welcome that. I think it's a fantastic idea.
The other group that we haven't mentioned is our own Gaming Research Advisory Committee. Christopher is on the agenda for our next meeting.
Right.
I think that your point is great. It's how do we get this out and make sure that we review it by all the relevant stakeholders and people that know something about this.
Right.
And that certainly is the groups that we just mentioned. And I think that we will, especially as we move together, communities, Springfield, Everett, we begin to standardize this for ways to move it and write it up.
Right, terrific. That's great. Really fascinating stuff. Yes.
Are there any questions about the baseline report? I've got it up here if anybody wants to review a section or. All right.
Good summary.
Thank you, Christopher.
Next time I'm here, I guess I'll be able to tell you what
Yes.
changed.
And I do want to thank Christopher publicly for, foreseeing the back end of this work, but an awful lot of work went in the front end, meaning sitting with chiefs, sitting with the lieutenant in charge of records, explaining why and how we would use this data and protect it. And that's the piece that is really, really important. And I want to publicly thank all the communities and the chiefs for their participation, because it really would not be possible without them.
That's really,
Thank you.
that's really what we want to say. This is a collaborative effort. You didn't say no. Great. Good. Well, thank you both. All right, let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the ombudsman, Mr. Ziemba.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before I get into my item, I just wanted to add one little note to the last presentation. In addition to the groups mentioned in the Gaming Research Advisory Committee, there's under the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee, there's a subcommittee on public safety. We've highlighted this report to them, and we anticipate Mr. Bruce presenting at an upcoming meeting, and we've sent the reports to them this morning. So that's another added mechanism for this review that you described.
Just want to say, I think the microphones are not working, so.
Oh, okay, right. No. Unfortunately, I love that.
We're good?
All right, Mr. Ziemba and Ms. Riley.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Commissioners, as you know, yesterday we received an RFA2 application from Massachusetts Gaming and Entertainment. We're currently reviewing the application for administrative completeness, which Janice Riley will describe. My presentation today is meant to be a reminder of some of the key upcoming dates of our application review process. October 13th is the deadline for surrounding community petitions and impacted live entertainment venue petitions. Pembroke has sent a letter to the Commission asking for surrounding community status, based primarily on a shared water supply with Brockton. MG&E has designated all 8 geographically adjacent communities as surrounding communities. By October 13th, those communities will need to provide a letter to the Commission assenting to this status. We'll be in communication with communities just to remind them that they just need to assent to that status through an email or through a letter to the Commission. And so we'll get that done in the upcoming days. After that, Mass Gaming and Entertainment has 10 days after petitions to submit a response to those petitions to the Commission. In a related matter, we indicated the intention to host a 90-minute presentation by MG&E on October 22nd. We sent that out in a release yesterday, and we've been in communication with the applicant to let them know that October 22nd is our anticipated date for that presentation. As you know, that presentation is an opportunity for the applicant to provide a general overview of their application. Again, it's limited to 90 minutes, and that's usually a very, very interesting and informative presentation. Our current schedule estimates that decisions on petitions that are filed by ILEVs or by surrounding communities would potentially be November 30th. That's an estimated date. This follows a presentation by those petitioning communities and ILEV applicants, which we estimate on October 28th. The difference between the October 28th presentation date and the November 30th decision date, that 1 month period, during that period, what we will do is we have to review the entire application to determine factors that are relevant to surrounding community status or ILEV status. We review the application, review the materials submitted during the presentations and in the petitions, and then we bring that before the commission. So if there are a small number of petitioners, that 1 month period of time could potentially shrink. But again, we do have some limitations that we do have to review the full application. One other factor that I will note is that our estimates have been available on our website for quite some time. So some communities may have been looking at our dates, specifically that November 30th date as the kickoff for this 30-day statutory negotiation period. They may be viewing that as a period that they're expecting, but as you know, all of our dates are estimated dates. We've made that quite clear on our website. To the degree that we can move those dates, we will take a look at that, and we could provide, obviously, ample notice to communities and others if indeed we need to change any of those estimated dates. So with that overview, let me turn to Janice Riley for a summary of what our process has been so far on our intake and next steps in our review.
Can I just, you've mentioned ILEVs, which are impacted live entertainment venues. You talked about that before, yeah. So
That's right.
that was what they are. Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Riley.
Just wanted to report in that we did receive the application yesterday from MG&E. We started the initial baseline review of that application, which included, as you know, the blocks on the application, ensuring that there was a summary of the answers to those questions in the blocks and that they had listed all of the attachments that they will be supplying to the commission and the evaluation teams. The review was completed yesterday, and we're hoping that we'll get to post the application, that piece of the application, onto the website today. And I'd like to thank the review team, Todd Grossman, Justin Stembeck, Carrie Teresi, and Mary Thurlow for helping with that process yesterday. So now we move on to the administrative completeness review, which we're hoping that we will be able to get the applications to that team tomorrow or on Monday to start that process, which could take up to 7 to 10 days. Once that process is completed, we'll determine whether there is additional information that we need from the applicants or if there are any deficiencies that were noted in the application at that point. The applicant would be notified, and depending on what materials we need to get from them at that point, it could be anywhere from 48 hours to 2 weeks before we're ready to move to the next step, which is to get the applications loaded up onto SharePoint and distributed to the evaluation teams.
So the administrative completeness piece of this is really looking at whether everything's there that we need to do.
That you need to do.
Evaluation, and then we move on to the substantive evaluation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're in
Great.
process.
That's great.
So 2 weeks sounds like it may be an appropriate date.
For getting the applications to the evaluation teams, or probably 2 weeks for the process for administrative completeness, and then we'll have to determine what materials we need to get, if there are any additional materials we need from the applicant in order to move on to the next step. So the process could, if we don't find any deficiencies or there are no additional requirements of the applicant, we could move quicker to the evaluation team process. But we won't know until we start administrative completeness.
I take it that that question there no is because of the size of the application. This application is about the similar size to yours,
Correct.
which is
Thousands
thousands.
of pages.
One thing I want to know, if Janice, if you didn't touch upon this, so we will try to get what we call the blocks, all the verbiage that are included in those blocks up on the website as soon as we can, as Janice mentioned today. In addition, there are a number of attachments that are included. Some are that include confidential information. Obviously, we will not post those, but we'll try to get those as soon as we possibly can to supplement what would be available pursuant to the block portion.
Correct. Anything that's not labeled confidential.
And that,
Great.
and that can come before 14 days. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, anything further questions? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the next item, which is racing. Mike Bond, McDonald,
Good afternoon, Commissioners. First up on the agenda is a request from Steve O'Toole from Plain Ridge Racecourse asking to reschedule a couple of days that they canceled earlier this year and reschedule them for October 13th and October 27th. And the horsemen are in agreement with this issue. Steve O'Toole's here today if you have any questions on it.
I have no question, Mr. O'Toole. See you, is there anything you want to?
Good to see you as well. Just that these were a couple of days that we canceled earlier in the season, and to meet the 105 racing day that's prescribed as a condition of our license, of the gaming license. We plug those days in, so we had a couple of Tuesdays. We're actually racing every other Tuesday now, so we plug those Tuesdays in this coming month. So we'll be going a challenging 4-day-a-week schedule for the month of October. The meet ends November 30th.
Those
Staff is in place and just works a little bit harder on a 4-day week. We just jostle schedules around a little bit. The challenging part comes with filling the race cards. Throughout the course of the year, we've consistently run about 9 races over the course of 3 days. We've had some 10 race cards as well. But this is a little bit challenging, and I think the horse, we've had a lot of conversations with the horsemen, and they're prepared to step it up a little bit and keep their horses in action. We do have, one of the reasons that we did opt to go 4 days a week in the month of October is Mass Sire Stakes races are raced at that time, and we were able to pluck a few of those races as betting races as well. So it didn't work out the first week, but I think we had some very good Sire Stake races, and I think we'll be able to use those as betting races on some future cards.
Great.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that the commission approve.
Discussion?
Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Alex.
Next up is Doug O'Donnell with a request for local aid payments.
Good morning, Commissioners. What you have in front of you is the quarterly local aid distribution. That's paid to the local cities and towns where racing is taking place and simulcasting, and we do need your approvals on this. It is done in 6-month in arrears, so it would be the handles in January, February, and March of 15 for payment on September 30th. And we also have the backup in your packet. You will have the backup of our monthly billing to all the different tracks.
So this is done every quarter, is that right?
Correct.
Every quarter, 6 months. 6 months in arrears.
Yes.
Okay, any questions about the data in the book? It's 0.35% of the contract in Suncast.
Handles, correct.
0.35%. Okay. Questions? All right, we'll hear a motion. Need to vote on that, too. It's actually for the quarter ending March.
It's for the quartering first quarter of calendar year this year. Yes, and payments are made 6 months after effect.
So it's for approving payments for the quarter ending March 31st, 2000.
Correct.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Ayes have it again, unanimous. And finally,
Yep. Next, we have just approval of a added racing official for Suffolk Downs, Rudy Baez. He's been in this position for a long time at Suffolk Downs, and it'll be pending completion of his background check. It's clerk of scales.
okay, there's going to be racing this Saturday
Yes,
and
this Saturday is the next day of their live racing.
Monday. Right? Saturday and
No, the next day will be October 31st.
October 31st.
Yeah. Yeah. And they've got 12 races, average field of 9 horses. So it should be good fields.
Right,
Yeah.
full day, yeah. Okay, and so is there any questions about the software?
Mr. Chairman, the gaming commission approved the request of Suffolk Downs to approve Adolfo Baez as racing official for the scales effective satisfactory conclusion.
Second. All right, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it unanimously, and Mr. Baez participate.
Thank you.
All right, anything further?
No,
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other business before the commission?
No, sir.
All right, do I hear a motion? Your second? All in favor? Aye. Ayes have that.
That was the